and I'm starting the first of 3 weeks on a series that I'm calling American Idolatry. And it'll be a fun time. This is part 1, and I call it Stars in Our Eyes. But last week we had the Super Bowl, and I spoke about the Super Bowl. There was an average. I looked at the average of how much a Super Bowl ticket would cost. It's really quite obscene, actually, because many people will buy Super Bowl tickets and resell them on the internet for huge prices. So by the time you averaged it out, I mean, you could spend $15,000 and get one of those press box seats that's cozy and warm. The average ticket sold for $4,000, which means most of us weren't going to the Super Bowl this year, right? Most people at the Super Bowl, though, even do not necessarily love the game or the teams that are there. They love seeing themselves at the Super Bowl game. Because you look, and I'm just thinking, how can all these actors and actresses be fans? You know, and they don't necessarily show up at all the games through the year, but the Super Bowl brings out a lot of people with a lot of money. And why I bring up the Super Bowl is I think it encapsulates this awkward idolatry that we have in America. It's a really good example. And now don't get me wrong, I enjoyed watching the game. I watched the game, it was fun, it was enjoyable. But here's something interesting. Coming up Tuesday, speaking of the presidential nomination election. So in a nation where it's as trivial as the Super Bowl, and say it's a lot like the future of our nation's leadership, I get a little worried. That's not a very good comparison. And they both have celebrities. They both have dozens of celebrities that show up, but it's not the same. And when all is said and done, it's a game, isn't it? It's a game that was played, and it's enjoyable, and then it's done. But voting for a leader is a little bit more important. Kind of muddied idolatry, where we make people out to be a lot more than what they are. And American Idol is a show that's now in full swing because it's January, and they're in season, I think, 7, which means for 7 years, millions of viewers are tuning in to watch hopefuls make it. And hundreds of hopefuls put themselves in front of Simon and Paula and Randy, and most of them are turned down and some remain. Then they narrow it down to a dozen, and they put them through all kinds of weird contests, singing all sorts of songs, so they can be critiqued in front of America, and then voted on, narrowing the field down to 3 people, then 2, and then 1. And that's how it's done. There's a little snapshot of American Idol. And what I'd like to think about today is how people will put so much effort into that 15 minutes of fame. Because when you hear interviews on American Idol, the people ahead of time, they're talking about this is their one chance to really make it. This is their chance to shine. And they're going to give it all they've got. They've flown or drove across the country. They've waited in line out on the cement, sometimes in the pouring rain, for hours just to get a chance to sing in front of 3 people who are going to determine if they're famous or not. That's kind of pitiful. Mostly because of all the effort that's put into that. And so much effort is not put into something a little more important. Jesus gives us a different path. And you notice that Jesus, alongside the things of the world in comparison, he always trades up, even if it has no glitter. So what I want to look at is a word today that's different than fame. Fame is kind of like glitter, and I want to talk about gold. And the word is legacy, and how it's a lot different than fame. And so today I just want to contrast some things that Jesus did and how Jesus had opportunities for fame and he never took it. Because instead he wanted to put all those moments and his energy into what would be a legacy. Legacy is a heritage, it's an inheritance, it's what you're left with when someone passes on. And somehow, in some way, we all want to leave some kind of legacy. Think about it. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want to be thought of for when people remember you? And what changes do you want to see happen through your life? So if fame is the glitter and legacy is the gold, then glitter or fame would be about now. What about now? How am I looked at now? How am I viewed now? Do people like me now? Legacy would be about further. It would be about later. It would be about what's going to last when I'm gone. What can I invest into that will remain and make a difference when I'm not here? When my 15 minutes of fame are gone and done with, and nobody remembers who I am, what have I done that will affect the future? And that's legacy, and that's gold. Glitter would be, is Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us? That's the legacy beginning. Here's the legacy he left. Think about this. One man with a dozen guys for 3 years in the backwoods, and the world is still being turned upside down. Think about that for a moment. One guy for 3 years with 12 other guys in a backwoods town, traveling basically like if we would travel around Washington State. Didn't take long trips, just went around his home area with a dozen guys, and the world is still being turned upside down. Because Jesus wasn't about fame, he was about making a difference. He was about the legacy, what would happen afterwards. And what's really cool is we get to be part of carrying on this legacy. We get to be part of furthering Jesus' work. And I would like to look at John 13, if you have your Bibles open to John 13, and look at a moment where Jesus set a standard for us in what would be eternally important to him and to his kingdom. John 13. I'm going to start reading in verse 1, John chapter 13. It says, "It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love." So this is it. This coming up is the full extent of his love. This is the ultimate moment. So what we're breaking it down is, this is like when they say, when we come back from the commercial, this is going to be the highlight of the show. You know, this would be the finale. This would be the final song. He's ready to show them the full extent of his love. Verse 2, "The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God." So he knew it was time to leave his mark. It was time to leave his legacy. So here's what he does. He got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Unbelievable. Because what John just said in 13:1 is that Jesus knew he was ready to go back to heaven, and he was ready to show them the full extent of his love. He's saying, this is it. This is the maximum snapshot of my love. And then he serves them. He gets down on his knees. The leader of this ragtag dozen, this leader who has performed miracles and taught thousands of people, now kneels down and he washes their feet. And he sets a precedent for us forever, that it's never about us. And that's what legacy is about. In the one moment where Jesus is saying, this is the full extent, this is it, this is my love fully revealed to you, he got down on his knees. The leader of this group. And what Jesus taught us is it isn't about us. It's about God's love for a dying world. It's about God's love for this world. It's that God loved so much that he sent his son. Continuing in verse 12, "When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes, and he returned to his place. 'Do you understand what I've done for you?' he asked them." Do you think they really understood?